My daughter pushed me to go out while he was on a business trip and find a new partner. I wouldn't dream that my own daughter was going to lead me to the worst decision of my life. My beloved, sweet, 16-years-old girl Claire has always supported me a lot. But now, all of a sudden, I find myself sitting here writing this out because her kind thoughts changed my life. Hi, my name is Alice. I'm 37 years old, living in a small town in Ohio. I've been married to Mark, my husband of 15 years, who's 42. Together, we built a life that seems stable and predictable. Mark works hard and provides for us, while I've been a stay-at-home mom to Claire. From the outside, we looked like the perfect little family. But inside, I've been feeling lonely for a long time. Mark is always traveling for work and neglecting me, therefore I was longing for affection, and Claire suggested to me this. I should have never followed her advice. Mark and I had a life that looked great on paper. He was the provider, a hard worker who always made sure the bills were paid and that we had a roof over our heads. But as much as Mark excelled in his role as a husband and father financially, he wasn't really present in the ways that mattered to me emotionally. His work trips were never ending, and when he was home, he was either glued to his phone or too exhausted to engage. I, on the other hand, have been a stay-at-home mom since our daughter Claire was born. I love being there for her, but over the years, I felt like I faded into the background of Mark's busy life. There were days when I felt like nothing more than a housekeeper or a roommate. I craved attention and connection, but I convinced myself this was just the way things were supposed to be. Claire, our 16-year-old daughter, is perceptive beyond her years. She's always had this way of picking up on my emotions, even when I try to hide them. Lately, she's been telling me how I deserve more than being ignored. She says it casually, but I know she means it. The most unrealistic decision seemed when Mark declared a month of business trip to New York. Another trip. Another day I stayed home and felt like a single parent while he spent the majority of the day lost in work and reports. One evening, while Claire and I were watching TV, I let my guard down and told her how lonely I'd been feeling. I didn't expect her response. She smiled and said, "Mom, maybe you need to go out and meet new people. It might do you some good." I just laughed it up, telling her that it was not my kind of move. But Claire would refer to it in the days that ensued, making it sound like a joke, which was all good. And somewhere down the line, her words were no longer just passing through my head into the waste bin. What if I did? What would be the harm? And little did I know that suggestion would open a door from which I could not retreat again. For days, Claire didn't let the idea go. Every time we talked, she'd casually slip in comments like, "Mom, you need a break," or "You never do anything fun for yourself." At first, I just rolled my eyes and told her to drop it, but she wasn't giving up that easily. One night, she walked up to my room and told me, "Mom, for the love of God, go out and date someone who cares for you. Get dressed, have a glass of alcohol, be happy for once. You deserve it." Her words stuck with me. Maybe she was right. It was, or seemed to be, years since I got out with the intention of going out, not for shopping or running errands. The day finally came when I gave in. It felt strange, even wrong, but I told myself it was just one night. I wasn't doing anything bad. Claire helped me pick out an outfit, a simple black dress I hadn't worn in years. She even styled my hair and did my makeup, saying I should look as amazing as I am. I tried to shake off the nervousness as I looked in the mirror. "Go have fun, Mom," Claire said with a wink as I grabbed my purse. "You need this. You deserve to be with some handsome guy." I went to get a nearby lounge they'd been gossiping about, though I had not been there myself. On entering the restaurant, I noted that the lighting was very low. There was some background quiet music playing, and people's murmur created a sort of comfort zone. Then again, I said to myself, "Hey, take a deep breath and chill a little." "It's just a drink," I thought. I found a quiet corner and ordered a glass of wine, trying to blend in. That's when I noticed Daniel. He was sitting a few seats away, talking to someone at the bar. He was tall, confident, and had this easy charisma that instantly drew people in. I told myself not to stare, but when he looked my way and smiled, I felt my cheeks flush. "Is this seat taken?" he asked, pointing to the chair beside me. I hesitated, but shook my head. No, go ahead. He said, "Hi, I am Daniel," and we began chatting. First, it was the casual conversation about where we are from, what jobs we have. Although initially I was nervous, as time went on, I was laughing at the jokes that he made and the nervousness disappeared. Daniel was charming, but not in an over-the-top way. He complimented my laugh and said something about how I didn't seem like the kind of person who came to lounges alone. "I don't," I admitted with a nervous laugh. "This is a first for me." He leaned in slightly, his voice soft but playful. "Well, I'd say you're handling it like a pro." The expression in his eyes gave me a feeling that I hadn't sensed for quite some time. It was not about that attention, it was about the kind of attention he was paying me. Even with Mark, I had the feeling that I did not exist, that he was completely entitled to my presence without my having to do anything to warrant it. But Daniel? He noticed. The conversation flowed so easily that I didn't realize how much time had passed. I told myself it was harmless. After all, I wasn't doing anything wrong. It was just talking, right? Yet I realized that, of course, it was not that straightforward. That look in his eyes, that voice which had such an impact on my sensibility, I haven't felt such a feeling for such a long, long time. The feeling that I would have never even known I needed. As I finished my drink and glanced at the time, I told Daniel it was getting late. He smiled and said he hoped to see me again. I walked out of the lounge that night with a strange mix of emotions, excitement, guilt, and a little bit of fear. I had no idea just how much that night would change my life. That night, as I was about to leave the lounge, he came over to ask for my phone number. For a moment, I hesitated. Part of me felt that I was getting too close to the line, but I talked myself into thinking there was nothing wrong with it. It wasn't like I was planning to use it for anything improper or immoral for that matter. So I gave it to him. We exchanged a friendly goodbye and I walked to my car. On the drive home, I kept telling myself it was just a conversation, nothing more. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had almost forgotten about it. The next day, a message came into my phone. It was Daniel. He said he would like to meet me, and he also said to have a very great evening, dear. I simply smiled when I read it and responded cordially in the same manner. "You as well. Nice to meet you." At first, his texts were harmless, simple questions about my day or comments about the weather, but slowly they started to change. He began complimenting me, telling me how kind, smart, and beautiful I was. "I don't think I've ever met someone as elegant as you," he wrote one afternoon. I was largely caught off guard when I was told something like that. He used to compliment me when we were young, the first few years of our marriage. He stopped altogether. But now, receiving such kind of attention again made me feel special. For a week, I kept the messages with Daniel as something casual in my mind. I told myself it was just a new friendship, but deep down, I knew I was treading dangerous territory. I wanted to date him so bad. Then, one evening, Daniel asked if I wanted to grab coffee. He said he was in town for work and had some free time. I told myself it was harmless, just two friends catching up. So I said yes. We met at a small cafe downtown. The conversation flowed as easily as it had that first night. But this time, something felt different. Daniel was more direct with his compliments. He said things like, "You're even more stunning in the daylight," and "I don't know how anyone could not adore you." Felt my cheeks become red, so I did not object to him. And yet, naked and vulnerable, I also understood and was interested in how he made me feel. They never made me feel like I was good enough, and for long, I felt as though I was just a shadow in my marriage. And here was someone who saw me, appreciated me, and gave me something that I lost a long time ago. Feeling alive. When we left the cafe, Daniel offered to walk me to my car. As we stood by my car door, he looked at me and said, "I'm really glad we met." I tensed slightly before he could utter another word. He moved closer. That made my heart race, but instead of walking away, I stayed there. I made up my mind that I could cease the process anytime, but I did not. When he kissed me, I also kissed him back. That kiss lasted longer than I care to admit. It felt exciting, forbidden, and completely unlike anything I had experienced in years. But as soon as it ended, guilt hit me like a ton of bricks. I shouldn't have done that, I whispered, pulling away. Daniel smiled softly. I'm sorry if I overstepped. I just couldn't help myself. I didn't know what to say. Instead, I got into my car and drove home in silence. The guilt was suffocating, but so was the memory of how alive I had felt in that moment. It was not wrong at all. It was for myself. We were talking to each other on texts, and this was how the conversation between Daniel and I went. I said to myself, I won't talk to him anymore. However, there was something that brought me back to him. He told me that he wanted to see me. I was craving for that appreciation. Finally, instead of heeding all the good advice, I consented to meet him again. Not that I wanted to do so, but he promised me so much love that I couldn't resist the temptation. This time, we didn't bother with a cafe or a public place. We met at a small boutique hotel on the edge of town. I had convinced myself it was just to talk, but deep down, I knew where this was heading. When I saw Daniel again, all my guilt seemed to fade into the background. He made me laugh, he made me feel special, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was just someone's wife or mom. I felt like me. I really wanted to be with him, and I was with him, which made everything so exciting. That evening, things escalated quickly. Daniel kissed me again, and this time I didn't hesitate. One thing led to another, and we ended up sharing an intimate night together. As I lay there afterward, the reality of what I had done hit me like a freight train. I had crossed a line I could never uncross. The weight of my choices settled heavily on my chest, but I didn't know how to stop the downward spiral I had started. When I got home after that night with Daniel, the weight of what I had done hit me harder than I ever imagined. I stood in the doorway, staring at the quiet house, and all I could feel was shame. My head was spinning with guilt and regret, and I couldn't believe I'd let things go this far. I tried to convince myself it was a mistake, just a lapse in judgment, but deep down, I knew better. I had crossed a line that couldn't be erased. I put my bag down and went straight to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face, hoping it would help me think clearly. It didn't. The days that followed were a blur. I told myself I could move past it if I just acted normal, pretend it didn't happen, and everything would go back to the way it was. But pretending was harder than I thought. Claire, being the observant teenager she was, picked up on my behavior almost immediately. One evening she sat down beside me on the couch, her eyes filled with concern. "Mom, are you okay? You've been acting different," she said. I forced a smile and brushed her off, saying I was just tired. But her words stuck with me. She was right, I wasn't okay. And the more I tried to act normal, the more I felt like I was falling apart inside. Mark returned from his business trip a week later. I thought I could keep it together, but every time I looked at him, the guilt felt unbearable. He walked through the door carrying his suitcase, smiling as if everything in the world was perfect. He kissed me on the cheek and asked how things had been while he was gone. "Fine," I lied. For a while, things seemed normal. Mark settled back into his routine, catching up on work and spending time with Claire. But I could feel the tension building inside me, like a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. That explosion came one evening when Mark was sitting on the couch scrolling through his phone. I was in the kitchen, tidying up after dinner, when I heard his voice call out, sharp and cold. "Alice, can you come here for a second?" Mark held up his phone. "Who's Daniel?" I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. "Do you want to tell me what these texts are about?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with tension. I glanced at his phone, and there they were, my messages with Daniel. I didn't know how he found them, but it didn't matter. The evidence was right there, staring me in the face. I felt like I was going to faint. My hands were shaking and my throat felt dry. "Mark, I can explain," I stammered, but the words sounded hollow even to me. "Explain what?" he said, his voice rising slightly. "Explain why you're texting another man? Or why is he calling you beautiful and saying he had an amazing night with you? Tears filled my eyes as I tried to speak. I made a mistake. It wasn't what it looked like, I swear. Mark's calm exterior cracked. Don't lie to me, Alice. I want the truth. All of it. I broke down, sobbing as I confessed everything. I told him about meeting Daniel at the lounge, about how I felt lonely and unappreciated, and about how it spiraled into something I never intended. I begged him to understand, to forgive me. At first, Mark didn't say anything. He just stared at me, his face a mix of shock, hurt, and anger. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but trembling with emotion. I can't believe this, he said, shaking his head. After everything I've done for this family, this is how you repay me? By cheating on me? I didn't mean for it to happen, I cried. I was lonely, Mark. I felt invisible. I just wanted to feel like someone cared about me. Mark's expression hardened. So you thought sleeping with another man was the solution? His words cut deep, but I couldn't argue. He was right. I had no excuse for what I'd done. I'm sorry, I whispered. I know I've hurt you, but please, don't let this destroy us. I'll do anything to fix this. Mark laughed bitterly, standing up and pacing the room. Fix this? How do you fix something like this, Alice? You betrayed me. You betrayed our family. He paused and looked at me, his eyes filled with pain. Was I not enough for you? I shook my head desperately. It wasn't about you, Mark. It was about me. I was struggling and I didn't know how to tell you. He scoffed. You didn't know how to tell me, but you knew how to text him? How can I meet him behind my back? I had no response. The room was heavy with silence as Mark sat back down, his head in his hands. I need time to think, he said finally. But don't expect me to just forgive you. I don't know if I can. That night, Mark slept in the guest room. I stayed awake, crying silently, and replaying the confrontation in my head. The reality of what I'd done was sinking in, and it was unbearable. In the days that followed, Mark barely spoke to me. He spent most of his time at work or out of the house. Claire noticed the tension and asked what was going on, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. One evening, Mark came home and told me he was staying with a friend for a while. I need space, he said. I don't know what's going to happen between us, but right now, I can't be here. As I watched him pack a bag and walk out the door, I felt like my entire world was falling apart. The life we had built together was crumbling, and it was all my fault. The fallout from my actions was more devastating than I ever imagined. I had hurt the man who had loved and trusted me for 15 years, and I didn't know if I would ever be able to make things right. After Mark left that night, the house felt unbearably empty. I kept hoping he would call or text, but days turned into weeks, and I heard nothing from him. Then, out of nowhere, I received an email. It was from Mark's lawyer. He had filed for divorce. Seeing the email was like a punch to the gut. I broke down, tears streaming down my face as I read the words over and over. It felt surreal. I wanted to believe this was just a scare tactic, but deep down, I knew Mark was serious. He was done. I tried reaching out to him multiple times. I texted, called, and even sent long emails explaining how sorry I was. I begged him to talk to me, to give me a chance to fix things, but he never responded. The silence was deafening, and each unanswered message felt like another crack in my already shattered heart. Then one day, I noticed Mark's social media profile had been updated. He had never been the type to post much, but now he was uploading pictures almost daily. Most of them were work-related, showing him at business meetings or out with colleagues. But one photo caught my eye. It was of Mark at a fancy dinner, smiling alongside a group of people. Standing right next to him was a beautiful woman. She looked polished and confident, her smile radiant. My stomach twisted in knots as I stared at the image. The caption was simple, "Great dinner with the team." But my mind couldn't help racing. Who was she? Was she just a coworker? Or was there more to their story? As the days went on, more photos appeared. Mark seemed happier than I had seen him in years. There were group pictures, selfies with friends, and even a candid shot of him laughing with that same woman. It was like he had stepped into a new chapter of his life, a chapter that didn't include me. Through mutual friends, I learned her name, Rachel. She worked with Mark and had recently joined his company. According to the whispers, she was smart, successful, and everything I wasn't. People said they made a great team, both professionally and personally. Hearing that broke me. I knew I had no right to feel jealous or betrayed, but I couldn't help it. Rachel seemed to be everything I had failed to be a partner Mark could be proud of. What hurt the most was the thought that Mark had moved on so quickly. While I was sitting at home drowning in regret, he was out there rebuilding his life. Every time I saw another post or heard another story about how well he was doing, it felt like a knife to the heart. I even ran into an old friend who told me Mark was planning to move into a new house bigger, better, and in a nicer neighborhood. She mentioned Rachel might be moving in with him. I forced a smile, pretending I wasn't falling apart inside. It wasn't just the pictures or the rumors that hurt. It was the realization that I had pushed Mark away, straight into the arms of someone else. My actions had destroyed our marriage, and now someone else was living the life I had taken for granted. Mark never once reached out to me. He didn't yell, he didn't fight. He simply removed me from his life. That was his revenge. While I was consumed by guilt and regret, he was thriving. Looking at his pictures now, I barely recognized him. He seemed confident and carefree, as though he had shed the weight of our broken relationship. Meanwhile, I was left to pick up the pieces of my own life, knowing I had no one to blame but myself. Mark's silence spoke louder than any words ever could. He didn't need to get even or make a scene. His happiness was punishment enough, and as much as it hurt to admit, I knew I deserved it. When the divorce papers were finalized, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Mark was gone. For good. I had spent weeks hoping he might change his mind, but he didn't. His silence was louder than any argument we could have had. And as much as it hurt, I knew I couldn't blame him. What I wasn't prepared for was losing Claire too. One afternoon, Claire came into my room, her face tense and serious. She told me she wanted to live with her dad. "Mom, I love you, and I really wanted you to date someone, but I would prefer living with Dad because he is financially stable, and I won't have any issue with him." A week later, Claire packed her things and moved in with Mark. Watching her leave was one of the hardest things I've ever had to endure. The house, once filled with her laughter and presence, felt eerily quiet. It wasn't long before I had to leave that house too. Mark had been paying the mortgage, and without his financial support, I couldn't keep it. I ended up moving into a small apartment on the edge of town. It was cramped and lonely, but it was all I could afford. My parents helped me move in, but even they seemed disappointed. "You had everything," my mom said as we carried boxes inside. "And you threw it all away for what? A fling?" Those words stayed with me long after she left. Loneliness became my constant companion in that apartment. The nights were the worst, sitting in silence with nothing but my thoughts. I kept replaying everything in my head, wondering how I let it all spiral so far out of control. I missed Mark. I missed Claire. I even missed the stability of my old life, the life I had so carelessly destroyed. But the consequences didn't stop there. Word spread quickly about what had happened. It was a small town and people talked. Friends who had once been close started pulling away. Invitations to coffee dates and get-togethers stopped coming. I'd see them in passing, and they'd give me polite smiles, but I could feel the distance. One day, I ran into an old friend at the grocery store. She smiled awkwardly, then mumbled something about being late and hurried off. I knew why. Her husband was friends with Mark, and I could only imagine what he had told her about me. It wasn't just the friendships that fell apart. I began to feel like an outcast in my own community. At school events or local gatherings, people would glance my way and whisper. I told myself I didn't care, but the truth was, it stung. There were nights when I sat in that tiny apartment, scrolling through my phone, tempted to call Mark or Claire. But what would I say? How could I fix what I had done? I couldn't even fix myself. The weight of my mistakes felt suffocating. I had lost my husband, my daughter, my home, and my friends. Everything that had once defined my life was gone. I spent a lot of time reflecting, asking myself why I did what I did. Was it loneliness? Was it a need for attention? Or was it something deeper, a part of me that didn't value what I had until it was gone? I didn't have answers. All I knew was that I had no one to blame but myself. My life had fallen apart piece by piece, and I was left with nothing but regret. The people I loved most were gone, and the life I once took for granted was now just a memory. The consequences of my choices were clearer than ever. And as much as I wished I could turn back time, I knew there was no undoing what I had done. Update: it's been 4 months since my world came crashing down, and I wish I had better news to share. But the truth is, I'm still picking up the pieces of the life I destroyed. Mark seems to be doing better than ever. Through mutual friends and social media, I've learned that he's thriving, both personally and professionally. His business is expanding, and he's even opened another location for his company. And then there's Rachel, his new partner. From everything I've seen and heard, she's smart, successful, and seems to bring out the best in him. Seeing pictures of them together feels like a stab to the heart every time, but I have no one to blame but myself. As for Claire, she rarely visits. She's chosen to stay with Mark full-time, and her calls have become fewer and farther between. When we do talk, it's short and distant. She's polite, but I can feel the wall she's put up between us. I miss her more than words can describe. The bond we once had feels like a distant memory, and I don't know if I'll ever get it back. She's angry, and rightfully so. I let her down in the worst way possible. Sitting in this small apartment, day after day, gives me a lot of time to think. I've gone over every choice I made, every moment where I could have stopped and turned things around, but I didn't. Loneliness clouded my judgment. I let my need for attention and validation outweigh everything that truly mattered in my life. I traded years of trust, love, and stability for a fleeting moment of excitement, and the cost has been unbearable. Looking back, I realize how much I took for granted. Mark wasn't perfect, but he was a good husband. Claire wasn't always easy, but she was my daughter, my partner in everything. I had a life that many people would envy, and I threw it all away. Some mistakes you don't recover from, and this might just be one of them. To anyone reading or listening to this, please learn from my story. Don't let temporary emotions or fleeting feelings lead you to destroy what truly matters. You can't undo some choices, no matter how much you wish you could. And the regret? It will stay with you forever. Take care of the people you love. Don't make the same mistake I did.